This is the complete, multi-century narrative saga of the Reconquista, the longest continuous conflict in human history. The 781-year war, the complete history of the Reconquista Act 1, the blitzkrieg of 711. In the early spring of 711, an army of roughly 7,000 Berber cavalrymen crossed the narrow stretch of water separating North Africa from Europe. At their head stood a fiercely ambitious commander named Tariq ibn Ziyad. When his boots hit the massive limestone promontory that would forever bear his name, Jabal Tariq, the mountain of Tariq, or Gibraltar, he did something terrifying. He ordered his men to burn their own ships. Turning to his troops as the smoke rose behind them, Tariq issued an ultimatum that would echo across centuries. "My men, whither can you fly? Behind you is the sea, before you is the enemy." 711 AD, the geopolitical shift. Visigothic Iberia, divided, weakened. Battle of Guadalete, Al-Andalus, the Umayyad Caliphate. Result, 90% of the peninsula conquered in 7 years. The enemy was the Visigothic kingdom, a fractured Germanic warrior elite that had ruled the Iberian Peninsula since the fall of Rome. Ripped apart by internal betrayals and civil wars, the Visigoths rushed south to meet the invaders at the Battle of Guadalete. It was an absolute slaughter. The Visigothic king Roderick vanished into the muddy waters of the river, leaving behind nothing but his golden sandals. With its leadership completely wiped out in a single afternoon, the Iberian Peninsula fell like dominoes. Within a staggering 7 years, the Umayyad armies swept past Madrid, past Barcelona, and reached the rugged Pyrenees Mountains. The cross was replaced by the crescent across 90% of the land, which the conquerors renamed Al-Andalus. Act 2, the Cave of Miracles, 718-722. By 718, Christian Europe's presence in Iberia had been crushed into a tiny, wet, mountainous strip in the far north called Asturias. A surviving Visigothic nobleman named Pelagius, Don Pelayo, gathered a ragged band of tribal rebels and broken soldiers in these mist-shrouded valleys, refusing to pay taxes to the southern governors. To the grand emirs in Córdoba, Pelagius was a joke, a wild donkey hiding out in a cave. In 722, a Muslim punitive expedition moved into the narrow valley of Covadonga to crush this minor annoyance. It was a fatal mistake. Pelagius used the jagged geography as a force multiplier. Hidden high on the cliffs and inside the deep limestone caves, his men rained down boulders, logs, and arrows onto the cavalry trapped on the valley floor below. The southern force was decimated. While modern historians consider Covadonga a minor mountain skirmish, to the fractured Christian world, it was a psychological miracle. It proved the invaders could be beaten. This wet valley became the cradle of the kingdom of Asturias, the tiny spark that ignited the Reconquista. Act 3, the jeweled caliphate and fractured kingdoms. For the next 2 centuries, a bizarre duality emerged. While the tiny Christian kingdoms in the north spent as much time fighting each other for land as they did fighting the south, Al-Andalus transformed into the absolute crown jewel of Western civilization. By the 10th century, under Abd al-Rahman III, the Caliphate of Córdoba was born. While northern European kings were largely illiterate and living in mud brick forts, Córdoba was a metropolis of over 100,000 people, boasting paved streets, public streetlights, running water, and massive libraries containing hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. It was a golden age of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, where Jews, Christians, and Muslims existed under a tense but prosperous system of convivencia, coexistence. But empires built on unimaginable wealth breed deep rivalries. Following the death of the brutal but brilliant military dictator al-Mansur, who had launched dozens of devastating raids into the north, the caliphate collapsed under the weight of civil war. By 1031, the unified southern powerhouse fractured into dozens of petty, warring city-states called taifas. The chessboard was completely flipped. The Muslim south was now weak and divided, while the Christian north, now split into aggressive kingdoms like Castile, Leon, Aragon, and Navarre, was hungry for territory. Act 4. The Swords for Hire, 1080s. The era of the taifas turned the Reconquista into a messy, fluid conflict where religion often took a back seat to political survival. Christian kings regularly allied with Muslim emirs to fight rival Christian kings. No figure embodied this chaotic gray area better than Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, famously known as El Cid. A legendary Castilian knight, El Cid was exiled by his paranoid king, Alfonso VI. Instead of heading to another Christian court, El Cid took his elite mercenary army straight to the Muslim Taifa of Zaragoza. For years, he fought brilliantly to defend a Muslim emir against both Christian and Muslim invaders alike, earning the title El Cid from the Arabic al-Sajid, meaning the Lord. Later recalled to Castilian service, he achieved his greatest triumph by conquering the wealthy Mediterranean kingdom of Valencia, ruling it independently until his death. Act 5. The Great Turning Point, 1212. Alarmed by the aggressive Christian expansion, the fading Taifa emirs looked across the Mediterranean for help. They invited the Almoravids, and later the Almohads, fundamentalist, ultra-militant Islamic empires from North Africa. These fundamentalist armies crossed the straits, crushed the local emirs, and turned the conflict into an uncompromising, total holy war. By 1212, the Almohad Caliph, Muhammad al-Nasir, had assembled a terrifyingly massive army. He vowed to march north, eradicate the Christian kingdoms entirely, and plant the banner of Islam in Rome. The threat was so existential that Pope Innocent III officially declared a crusade. For the first time in history, the fiercely competitive Christian kings of Castile, Aragon, Navarre, and Portugal put aside their blood feuds to march under a single banner. On July 16, 1212, the two massive hosts clashed at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa. The Almohad Caliph directed the battle from a grand tent pitched on a hill, surrounded by an elite vanguard of bodyguards who were chained together to form an unyielding human wall. The fighting on the valley floor was a brutal, exhausting meat grinder. As the Christian lines began to buckle under the intense summer heat, King Alfonso VIII of Castile turned to his archbishop and shouted, "Archbishop, here we die!" The Christian kings led a desperate, all-or-nothing heavy cavalry charge straight into the center of the Almohad lines. In a stroke of tactical brilliance and sheer luck, King Sancho VII of Navarre, a giant of a man, and his knights breached the human chain protecting the caliph's tent. The caliph fled the field in panic. Seeing their leader run, the Almohad army broke. The resulting rout shattered Muslim military power in Iberia forever. In rapid succession, the iconic capitals of the south fell to the Christian advance: Córdoba in 1236, Valencia in 1238, and Seville in 1248. Act 6. The Last Stronghold, 1248–1492. By 1250, the Grand Empire of Al-Andalus had shrunk to just a tiny sliver of territory at the mountainous southern tip of Spain, the Emirate of Granada. Protected by the rugged Sierra Nevada mountains and the breathtaking, heavily fortified palace of the Alhambra, Granada managed to survive for another 250 years. It did so primarily through economics. The Muslim emirs paid an astronomical annual tribute in pure gold to the Kingdom of Castile. For the Christians, Granada was an incredibly lucrative cash cow that required no administrative costs. But this fragile status quo shattered forever in 1469 due to a secret royal wedding. Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon married, uniting the two largest Christian kingdoms into a single superpower, Spain. Fiercely pious, intensely ambitious, and armed with a brand-new technological terror, heavy gunpowder siege artillery, the Catholic monarchs, launched the final campaign of the war in 1482. One by one, Granada's mountain fortresses were blasted into rubble. Act 7th, The Moor's Last Sigh. By the winter of 1491, the city of Granada was completely surrounded, starved, and cut off from any hope of rescue from North Africa. Inside the walls, the young emir, Muhammad Dalquthayth, known to the west as Boabdil, looked out at his suffering people and knew the end had come. On January 2nd, 1492, Boabdil rode out of the stone gates and officially handed the keys of the Alhambra to Ferdinand and Isabella. Legend says that as Boabdil rode away into exile, he stopped his horse at a mountain pass, looked back at the glistening red towers of his lost paradise one final time, and wept. His mother, furious at his lack of resolve, snapped bitterly, "Do not weep like a woman for what you could not defend like a man." To this day, that mountain pass is called El Suspiro del Moro, the Moor's last sigh. The conclusion of the 781-year war changed the trajectory of the entire planet. Spain suddenly possessed a massive, highly experienced, and deeply zealous standing army, with no one left to fight. Just months after the fall of Granada, an Italian explorer named Christopher Columbus was granted funding by Ferdinand and Isabella in that very same Alhambra palace. The battle-hardened soldiers who had spent generations fighting the Reconquista would become the conquistadors, carrying that exact same aggressive crusading zeal across the Atlantic Ocean to forge a global empire. 781 years of continuous warfare ended on a cold January morning in 1492, and in doing so, it birthed the modern world.